Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to the Death and Grief Talk podcast live series. My name is Joelle Simone Maldonado. I'm also known as the Grave Woman. I am the founder of the Multicultural Death and Grief Care Academy and the host of the Death and Grief Talk podcast. I am so honored and so excited today to be joined by Dr. Qwynn Galloway-Salazar. Dr. Qwynn, Dr. Q, welcome to the Death and Grief Talk podcast. How are you doing?
Oh, girl. Let me say, hey, girl. Hey.
Hey, girl, hey.
I am absolutely amazing. Being able to sit in this space with someone that has been collecting space in my head for the past few years. So it's an honor to be here with you today, Joelle. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for being here. And before we get started, I just want to recognize and give you your flowers for all the amazing work that you're doing in the space of suicidology, which I didn't even know was a word until I had that conversation with you when we met virtually for the first time. For the work you're doing for veterans, thank you for your service, not only as a veteran, but for the space you're holding for veterans. And congratulations to you. Dr. Q, Dr. Qwynn is a honoree for the USA Today Woman of the Year. She's a USA Today 2024 Woman of the Year honoree. Congratulations. And how does one even fathom becoming a Woman of the Year honoree?
Thank you. I have no idea. Quite honestly, I am still soaking it in because that's hard to fathom. I think it's a matter of I've been walking this earth doing this work that I think changes lives and saves lives. And some folks caught wind of it. And here we are. I'm grateful, but I'm more so grateful for the lives that I get to impact on a day-to-day basis. That is a success. And that is the win for me.
You know what? Before we even get too deep, I want to say that is one of the things that made me want to have you on this platform and talk to you, because in the first conversation we had, you said to me, I want to do something that enables us not only to share our stories, but to begin to pass the torch to those that we've opened doors for and those that are coming behind us. And I thought to myself, she gets it. Like, it's not about her and what, it is about you and what you're doing, but you understand that nobody is bigger than the mission. And the mission is creating community and safe spaces, especially for people of color, but for everyone. So before we get too deep in our conversation, I want to give you the floor to introduce yourself, introduce and tell us about In Their Honor, and anything else that you'd like to share with those that are watching or that will watch in the future.
Yeah, sure. So once again, I'm Qwynn. I am an Army veteran. I am a spouse to a retired combat veteran. I'm a caregiver. I'm a mama. I'm a daughter. I'm a sister. I'm a dope friend. All the things that make this human existence, this human experience wild and a fun ride. I am also a death doula, a storyteller, a story collector, a death educator. And that's one of the reasons I come to this space. I'm also the CEO of a small boutique consulting organization called In Their Honor, where I began. Here's the thing. I started In Their Honor in the middle of the pandemic. And I started it simply because I knew, I had a mentor that was dying from stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. And she shared with me, Qwynn, more needs to be done for veterans at the end of life. And so I reached out to some of my colleagues I had in the field and got connected to hospice and became a hospice volunteer. But I realized that this small passion project that I was doing in my community, because of course we couldn't see patients live, I started talking about it everywhere I was going. And in my mind, Joelle, I'm thinking, people are doing all the things that they need to do for veterans when it comes to the end of life, right? They're having these conversations everywhere, all the time. this is what's happening. And then I realized as I was asking people, what is happening? There were crickets. I didn't want to know what systems were doing. I didn't want to know like healthcare systems, institutions were doing, the VA was doing. I wanted to know what communities, what everyday people were doing. Those people that see veterans in their communities and say, thank you for your service. I wanted to know what they were doing. And it was limited. And so I felt that there was this calling to say, we need to raise the bar on how we care for those who raised their right hand and stood for us. How do we now stand for them and their loved ones and their caregivers at one of the most pivotal moments of their existence? How do we do that? And I started having these conversations. And before I knew it, this passion project that was just in my community kind of went national. And here I am, right? And I think at the crux of my work, even though In Their Honor is focused on raising awareness, collecting stories, educating, my work is really about inspiring people to do the things that they didn't know how to do or have the conversations they didn't know how to have. And that is my jam.
That is so beautiful. And it's so beautiful for so many reasons. Like being someone who is not a veteran, but seeing my dad and my grandfather and several other members of my family who are, it's always interesting to me to think about the fact that they're not necessarily, or prior to you, that there weren't necessarily resources available to veterans at the end of life. Because when you go to restaurants, you get discounts on things or priority anything, right? How do you think that gap was created in our society that detached end of life? Like, how did that happen? Why was that?
Yeah, there's this divide, right? What I don't want to say is that there were not resources and programming being done, right? So, for example, NHPCO has the We Honor Veteran program. You have pioneers like Deborah Grassman that have been doing this work. But from my lens, I wanted to see it from a social, a public health, a community health lens in terms of, well, how do we look at the population, right? In communities where they live, where they work, where they die, and how do we show up for them? But there's this divide, right? There's this divide that unfortunately for decades has been in place because those who've never served in uniform sometimes feel that they don't have the cultural competence to care or to have conversations with those who have worn the uniform. And I'm going to say this, and this is a secret, but it's not a secret. Throw the cultural competency to the side, right? And bring in that cultural humility to say, I don't know what I don't know, but I'm walking into this space with you as a blank slate to learn what your experiences, what they were, what they are, how they shaped who you are now at the end of your life. I tell people all the time, our military and veteran community, we are not a monolith. So with that being said, every one of us has had different experiences. We have come back to different worlds when we step out of uniform. And it's up to civilians to say, let me take a moment and just talk to you for a minute. When I say thank you for your service, for some veterans, that means absolutely nothing because you don't know what I did. I had a death doula say this to me a few years ago, that she was working with a Vietnam veteran at the end of his life. And she said, thank you for your service. And his response to her was, what are you thanking me for? You have no idea what I did. So before we utter those words, before we decide to put our foot in our mouth, let's just be a little bit, let's bring a little bit of compassion to the journey and say, if you want to talk about your military experience, because for some veterans, it's not a pivotal point in their life, but if they want to, ask them. First of all, ask this primer question. Have you or your loved ones served in the armed forces? Don't ask, are you a veteran? Because for some women, some other minority populations in the veteran community, they may not identify readily. Ask the simple question, have you served? Then ask what branch, what era, what was your job? What were some of the highs? And even if you're willing to share, what were some of the lows of your experience? As civilians, those are some of the questions you can ask. You don't need to know all the acronyms. You don't need to know every tidbit about every war. But asking those basic primer questions will get a conversation started that can help to bridge that divide between civilians and military and veteran communities.
Thank you for that. We'll talk a little bit about this more later, but um, I attended a class at the Cremation Innovation Convention this past week, and we were empowered with conversation around suicide, which we're going to talk about in just a few moments. But I love that you said these are the questions to ask, because a lot of times I think you use the word putting our foot in our mouths. We say things out of habit and out of, I saw other people say this and it got a response, so I'm going to say it because I want to be reverent and I want to honor. But I love what you said about you don't know what I did. And that leads me to my next thought, is not going into detail that you may not want to explore, but what types of unique grief might we as civilians and as death care practitioners and those that are doing service in another capacity need to be aware of, as far as the unique grief that veterans experience?
Yeah. You know, whether it's working with veterans, right, looking at the profession of end of life, right, whether you're a doula or whether you're working in hospice care, all the way to, burials and cremations, you have this opportunity to work alongside of that veteran and care for that veteran, care and support that veteran's loved ones. With that may come secondary trauma. With that may come compassion fatigue. Because as you're having this journey, you may hear of stories that veteran may carry related to, regrets, unfinished business that they may have left on the combat field, guilt, the need to be forgiven, shame, right? And it's important for us as end of life professionals to be a safe container in those spaces, but to also know that it's important for us to lean on our tribe when it gets heavy. We already are working in a death space, and you are caring for a population that are trained on death, dying, killing for a long extended period of time. And so I think as we are working this space, it's also important to have our ladder holders, or I have a colleague that calls it the rope team, people that can support you through these journeys, because you may be working with that veteran, but once that veteran dies, that family has a story too. There's need for closure and healing, and there may be trauma elements within that family that carries on to the funeral home, right? And being prepared for some of those hard conversations is important too. So once again, I'm going to bring back that topic of cultural humility, right? Being compassionate and being understanding that these families, our veterans, have so many stories to tell. When afforded the space, when afforded the opportunity to build that rapport and connection, build it. If that means actively listening, if that means validating their experiences, can I ask you all to just go the extra mile, right, with our veterans and their caregivers and loved ones as they navigate that space?
Thank you for that so much, Dr. Q. As you were speaking, Spirit reminded me that in my town, because I live in Beaufort, South Carolina. A lot of people know Beaufort, South Carolina because of Parris Island, which is the Marine training base station here. And we have I live right down the street from the air station. We have the Naval Hospital. So there's several branches of the military here. And this is a military town. And in honor of this being a military town, one of our smaller cities, the city of Port Royal, has a speed limit of 22 miles per hour throughout certain parts of the town of Port Royal, which is done to represent the number 22 that is often cited as the number of veterans who commit suicide every day in the United States. And so I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your work as a suicidologist and retract to that comment I made and share more about that experience I had at the CANA convention. So how did you, I didn't even know suicidology was a thing. Can you educate us a little bit about the topic of suicidology and what about that specific area of practice attracted you and the work that you do in that area?
That's a loaded question. But I'm going to back up for a moment and have a loving teaching moment. So September is Suicide Awareness Month. And one of the things as suicidologists, as those that are in the space of suicide prevention, that we try to do is really share how important language matters. So when we hear the term someone committed suicide, we try to reframe it to say someone died by suicide. And so if there's anything that we can take away today from the space of suicide prevention, is it's really important that we shift the way we put language around someone committed suicide to someone died by suicide.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Yeah. I like to say suicide prevention chose me. I didn't choose it. I was working for the National Guard back in 2015, and I received a call to do a wellness check. And it happened to be for a woman veteran that had attempted suicide. And that was the very first time that I had been so up close and personal with suicide. And I knew I needed to do something about it. Because there's this, we can talk about it from a public health lens, but I really like to talk about it from a connection lens. We say that the numbers of suicide of veterans are between 17 to 22 a day, right? 22 has been like that number that we keep talking about in stats. But there are so many factors related to suicide, right? Specifically for me in the work that I do, I look at the factors related to sense of belonging or lack of belonging, isolation, lack of connection. Because when people feel alone, all they're left with are their thoughts. And sometimes those doggone thoughts get so heavy that for them, they feel that there's only one way to alleviate or to have relief from those thoughts. So when you look at the broad field of suicide prevention or suicidology, right? Suicidology, those are the folks that study suicides, but it's more about this lens of suicide prevention. What are ways that we can ensure we are preventing suicide? How can we ensure that we're promoting connection? How can we ensure that we are promoting lethal means safety? And these are strategies that that cross not just for veterans, but yes, that not only cross the line of veterans, but cross everyday people. People are dying by suicide younger and younger. We see it in the news, right? It is one of the leading causes of death. And so it's so important when I think about, yes, the work that I do in suicide prevention as it relates to our veteran community. It's so important to look at your friends and look at your neighbors, the ones that you think are hella strong, right? That are the ones that look like they have it together all the time. Check in on them. Those ones that are always there for someone else all the time, day in, day out, please check in on them. And if you're ever in a position where you know that you're checking in on them and you know that they are not okay, I need you all to be aware that you can help prevent a suicide. You can ask the hard question, are you thinking of killing yourself? Yes, that's probably one of the hardest questions that may roll off of your tongue. But the more and more you practice it, if you ever have to ask that question, it won't be as hard. If you ask that question, are you thinking of killing yourself? The next thing you're going to want to do is stay with that person until help comes. You put it up there, 988. It's the suicide crisis line, right? If it is a veteran or someone in the military connected community that you are concerned about, you're going to dial 1, right? And it's going to take you to the crisis line specifically for military and veteran communities. But ask that question. Don't be afraid. What you're going to want to do is you're creating time and space. That's what we always want to do when we know that someone has suicidal thoughts or suicidal ideations, as we call it. We're wanting to create a level of time and space for them, right? Please, it may be your neighbor. It may be your spouse. It may be your child. Do not think you are exempt from anyone in your circle from having ideas of suicide. To be quite honest, there are more people that think of suicide than we think. And that's important to know, right? But it's also important to tell those people that we know that are having these ideations that there is help, there are resources, and they're not alone. That's that connection piece that's so important. We live in a society where we pull up wherever we live, jump out the car, jump in our house. We don't connect with people the way we used to. We feel like we connect with people on social media. No. If it means showing up at your friend's house with some cheesecake because you haven't heard from them in a few days and you normally hear from them more often, can I encourage you to do that? Because you just might save their life.
I shared a few minutes ago about the experience I had at Cana, the cremation convention. I was trying to Google her last name as you were speaking, but I was so engaged in what you were saying. I cannot remember her last name. Her first name's Sarah. She's also a suicidologist, and she was having a conversation.
Ward?
Is it Ward? I don't want to say yes because it's escaping me. I will Google it in just a second because I want to acknowledge her work and her impact. But she taught us in her session that there's 4 questions you want to ask. The first was, are you feeling suicidal? Or like you said, are you thinking of killing yourself? The second, or taking your life. Are you thinking of taking your life? The second was, do you have a plan?
Yep.
The third was, do you feel comfortable sharing your plan with me?
Yep.
And the fourth is, if you're okay, is it okay if I call someone to help us work through this? And she said the same thing that you said, that it is creating space and creating time and giving someone's thoughts, or getting someone's thoughts out of, not necessarily out of that place, but onto the present moment. And when she shared the story, and she shared it openly, she shared the story of someone who had been in one of her seminars. They went back to their job at the funeral home. Their coworker was talking or not talking, and just kind of not themselves. They hadn't been for a few months, but they seemed really disconnected. And she asked that question, "Are you thinking of ending your life?" And he said, "Yes." She said, "Do you have a plan?" He said, "My plan, yes, I have one." "What is your plan? Would you share your plan with me? When everyone goes home today, I'm going to lay on the embalming table and shoot myself in the head. Is it okay if I call someone to help us work through this?" Yes. And she talked about the fear that that person felt, that that person would hate them for the rest of their life. He got, if I remember the story correctly, Dr. Sarah, please forgive me if I'm missing parts, but she said she got a call from him maybe a week or two later, and he said, "I love you."
Yeah.
As someone who has been in a situation with a very close loved one who told me that they were going to end their life, I cannot imagine not being armed and empowered with those questions moving forward. My question to you is, even if you ask those questions, even if you do everything humanly in your power to help and it doesn't, how do you move forward from that?
Yeah, that looks like getting yourself the help that you need, right? Because there is, when you know you've done all the things, unfortunately, there will still be those that still complete. And you may live with this sense of survivor's guilt, right? I should have, I could have, what did I miss? What was that? What did I miss? That's what I often hear people say is, what did I miss? Those are the points where you have to be able to get your own help at that point, right? Because it can taunt and it can have a negative impact on you, right? Because we internalize and now it becomes, it's our fault. It's our fault. We missed something. So I would definitely say look for those resources in your community. Be willing to have a conversation with someone so that you're able to lay it all out and get the closure you need, right? Knowing that you did all that you could in supporting that person. It doesn't make it easy because I've heard those stories too. It doesn't make it easy, but it's so important that you're willing to get help for yourself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Q. Another thing that Dr. Sarah said during that session, which was, I don't want to say mind boggling, but it was eye opening for me. She said that a lot of times people assume that those with depression are the individuals that are more prone to trying to take their lives. Am I saying that correctly? I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I appreciate you so much for educating me, because I feel like language is important. But that's not the case. It Depression is not a predecessor for suicidal ideation, and that was so eye-opening for me.
Mm-hmm. There are so many factors. There are so many factors, and just saying, okay, someone who has a clinical diagnosis, right? You may have someone who has a gambling problem who's now in just a mass of debt. There's so many factors that it's you can't pinpoint just one and say people that live with behavioral health challenges are the only ones that by suicide.
Are interventions in situations where someone is having ideation beneficial? And by interventions, I mean groups of people approaching them.
I mean, it can be. It
Can be.
really depends on the person, right? There are so many evidence-based modalities when it comes to suicide prevention, right? One that I teach, actually, I'm teaching shortly after this call, is it's called the crisis response plan, right? Crisis response plan, really, really simple. Once again, it's creating that time and that space for that person, but it's really getting down on an index card what matters to that person. I remember several years ago, I had the opportunity to do a crisis response plan with a combat veteran, right? And I remember, and I'm gonna spare the language because he was hardcore as all get out. And he was like, "Yeah, I'll do this, but it doesn't matter." But when I get you to write out when things are going bad, what does it look like? Are you more irritable? Are you angry? Are you drinking? Are you dot 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 fill in the blank? Then when I get you to fill out, well, what are some of the things that you can do when you're in that space? Does it look like going for a walk? Does it look like journaling? Does it look like, having a slice of pizza? Then when I say to you, okay, when you hit those two things, then you need to talk about it. Who's like, old school, who's your top five, right?
Right.
Who's the five people that is it your mama? Is it your pastor? Is it your best friend? Who is in that space that you can call? And then when I get you to write what matters to you, what are your reasons to live? Then when I say, when all else fails, who are you going to reach out to in an emergency? Now, I want you to carry that card with you. So if those thoughts start to be activated, you can pull that card out and say, oh yeah, I'm not okay right now, so maybe I need to go do this. Okay, I'm still not okay. Let me call my mama. All right. Why am I still living? Right? I have a dope spouse. I have amazing kids. My faith is strong. Whatever it is, but sometimes we have to see it in black and white so that we know it is so, right? Because sometimes in those moments where we have those thoughts, we're not seeing the positive aspects of our lives to realize that this permanent solution, dying by suicide, is a permanent solution to the challenges that you may have that are temporary, that resources and supports can be wrapped around if you are willing to let someone be. But I think that, and I tell people, you don't have to be clinical, you don't have to be licensed, you don't have to have a PhD. It is a matter of just saying to someone, "Are you okay?"
Are you okay?
And going through those questions and knowing what to do. You don't need to be a clinician. You just need to be very aware and observant to the people in your circle, to the people you care for, to hear the things that they are not saying, but you see it. We got to show up in this human existence intentionally, looking at each other beyond what you see here, but taking a look on the inside to say, someone's not good, or I'm not good. We get so caught up in this noise that's going on in this world that as we're getting caught up in all of the noise, people are dying because they no longer feel they are seen, loved, and valued. We got to tap back into being compassionate, empathetic, humanistic humans, showing up for one another day in and day out. It does something to the hormones in the brain when you do something for someone else that makes you feel good, that says, okay, let me do it again. And hopefully when you do that and you do it for someone, that someone now knows what to do for someone else. And then we create this ripple effect where we become a society that cares for one another versus not seeing.
You've given us so much, Dr. Q, and I appreciate this conversation so much. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking about how, like, even in public, we're not connected, even though we share common spaces. We're on our phones, we're, looking at books and emails and text and things, social media. And if I take nothing else from this conversation today, it's pay attention. And not to say pay attention like you said, what did I miss? Like you're gonna catch everything. But just pay attention. And something I've been working on personally, I realized during a simulation a couple weeks ago, I am not as nice as I think I am when my back is against the wall or when I'm in a situation I'm not getting my way. And I think, I don't know if it exists, but there needs to be some type of training. Maybe it's home training. And I could say I got some good home training personally. But even with all my good home training, we forget that we are on this planet with other people sometimes. And other people don't share our thoughts, our cares, our concerns. You never know. People say all the time, you never know what someone's going through. And so if I take nothing away from this conversation other than pay attention, it's to remember to be compassionate. I want to thank you for this conversation, for your education, which was so loving. And I love you for that. And I will carry that forward with me. And I hope that anyone that is watching or that will watch carries that forward as well. But where can we learn more about you? What's coming up for you? And how can we remain connected to you?
Yeah, sure. So I live this amazingly wild life, right? And I want to jump for a second for what you just said. Please take this. I see you. As many times as you can see someone, even when it's someone that's not nice, there's a reason why they're not nice. There's a reason, right? It may not be at the surface. It may be a childhood trauma. It may be someone treated them horribly as a child, right? Going back to that home training. People want to be seen. So however you can have moments with people, whether it's the cashier that's ringing you out, she's wearing a name badge or they're wearing a name badge, call them by their name. Thank you, Joelle. Thank you, Qwyn. Let them know they're more than ... People want to be seen. So you asked, where can people see me next? I will be hitting the stage at Endwell on November 22nd in LA. And I am so stoked because I get to hit the stage with some of the greatest thought leaders, doulas, end-of-life professionals, people in the arts world in this one day. And I am so excited. So that's November 26th, November 22nd, I apologize, in LA. You can find me on Instagram, QG Salazar. Or you can go to my website. I keep my website very general for a reason. So my website is intheirhonor.info. And it's really general. If you want to reach out, hit that connect me or connect us link. Send me a message. It goes directly to me. If you want to have a virtual coffee, I am always open to virtual coffee dates, right? Because I think in this world where everything is technology driven, you can be in Europe and we can still set that up and figure out ways to change the world. So if you're all about changing the world and you want to figure out, hey, how can we do that together? Don't hesitate in reaching out. I'm here for it.
Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you. I have to tell you, there have been consistently during our time together, 5 to 6 people watching live. And believe it or not, that is the most that we've had here live. Now, the replays always get good numbers, but you have kept the audience engaged for 39 going on 40 minutes. So thank you. A huge shout out to each and every one of you that are watching live. She must be sharing some good stuff. And before we got started, her thing was, let's have fun. And I have truly had a good time. I've learned a lot from you. And I just thank you for being who you are. So.
Thank you, my sister. This has been amazing. And to those who have stayed with us and to those that will watch this replay, remember, you can make a difference. Everywhere you go, tell people, I see you.
I see you, Dr. Q. I see
Have
you.
an amazing afternoon. And Joelle, we will be talking real soon.
Yes, we will. Thank y'all so much. Live life, love hard, and we'll see you next time.